Every unresolved trauma silently transforms into a script that you repeat without realizing. That toxic relationship that feels familiar, the pattern of self-sabotage that always returns, the sensation of being trapped in a vicious cycle. It's not coincidence. It's your unconscious directing your life. In this video, I'll reveal how your childhood traumas are secretly controlling your choices, relationships, and even your future. What you'll discover may be disturbing, but it's the first step to rewriting your story. Keep watching and find out why you keep making the same mistakes and how you can finally break free. If this content is already touching something deep within you, be sure to subscribe to the Inner Mirror channel, leave a like, and share this video. In the comments, I want to know which pattern you suspect you're repeating in your life. I promise that by the end of these 17 minutes, you'll have transformative insights about your own story. The past isn't just a distant memory. It's an active force shaping our present and future in ways we rarely perceive. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychoanalysts of all time, expressed this clearly when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This phrase reveals a fundamental truth about human nature. When we don't understand the psychological forces moving us, we tend to believe we're being guided by chance, bad luck, or some mysterious force called destiny. But what if I told you that many of the painful and repetitive situations in your life aren't the work of fate, but rather unconscious patterns created by unprocessed traumas? Think about some painful pattern you notice repeating in your life. It might be attraction to emotionally unavailable partners. Perhaps you always end up in jobs where you feel undervalued. Or maybe you sabotage your achievements when you're close to success. Why do these patterns persist, even when you consciously desire something different? The answer lies in what Jung called complexes, constellations of charged memories and emotions that form a kind of partial personality within us. When we suffer trauma, especially in childhood, our psychic system creates these complexes as a way to organize the painful experience and protect us from future harm. The problem is that these protection mechanisms created in childhood rarely function well in adult life. The child who learned to become invisible to avoid the unpredictable anger of an alcoholic parent might transform into an adult who fears expressing themselves and taking leadership positions. The girl who needed to emotionally care for a depressed mother might become a woman who only attracts needy and dependent partners. Our unconscious doesn't understand linear time. For it, the past continues to live in the present. When current situations awaken memories associated with original traumas, even if we don't consciously remember these events, our body and psyche react as if we were reliving that traumatic moment. Jung called this phenomenon repetition compulsion. It's as if our unconscious is trying to resolve the original trauma by recreating similar situations, hoping that this time we might find a different resolution. Unfortunately, without awareness, we end up merely repeating the same painful script indefinitely. A useful metaphor is to think of trauma as a scratched record. The needle gets stuck in the same groove, continuously repeating the same section of music. The only way to move forward is to consciously lift the needle and move it to a new point. But understanding this intellectually isn't enough. As Jung said, knowledge does not transform us. Suffering transforms us. Many people spend years in cognitive therapies, reading self-help books, watching videos like this, but remain stuck in the same patterns. Why? Because trauma isn't just a distorted idea or thought. It's engraved in our nervous system, in our cells, in our body language, and in our deepest emotions. Trauma is an embodied experience that demands an approach going beyond simple intellectual understanding. Let's examine how this process works in practice. If you grew up with emotionally inconsistent parents, perhaps a mother who alternated between extreme affection and cold rejection, your infantile nervous system learned that love is unpredictable and potentially dangerous. As a vulnerable and dependent child, you probably developed strategies to deal with this inconsistency, perhaps becoming hypervigilant to others' moods, perhaps suppressing your own needs, or perhaps developing a deep fear of intimacy. Now, as an adult, you consciously desire a stable, loving relationship, but your unconscious and your body are programmed for the familiar pattern of emotional inconstancy. When you meet someone consistently loving and stable, paradoxically, you may feel anxiety or boredom instead of security. That healthy stability simply doesn't feel right. It doesn't resonate with the pattern your nervous system recognizes as love. And so, without realizing, you may sabotage the healthy relationship or gravitate toward people who replicate the familiar, inconsistent dynamic from your childhood. Not because you consciously choose suffering, but because your unconscious system is following the only map it knows. As Jung wrote, everything that we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate. Unprocessed trauma literally becomes the invisible scriptwriter of your life, and it will continue to be so until you recognize it and begin the healing work. In the next part of this video, we'll explore the most common signs that you're living under the influence of unhealed traumas and how to specifically identify which patterns are directing your life. It's not easy to look at these shadows, but as Jung reminds us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. How do you know if unhealed trauma is directing your life? The first step to breaking free from these unconscious patterns is recognizing them in action. As Jung wrote, to confront a person with their shadow is to show them their own light. By identifying our trauma-based patterns, we begin the journey toward authentic choice and freedom. Let's explore the most common signs that unhealed trauma is operating as your invisible puppeteer. First, there's the unmistakable feeling of déjà vu in your emotional life. You find yourself saying, "Why does this always happen to me?" Or, "How did I end up here again?" This recurring sense of familiar pain is your first clue. Your conscious mind may be confused, but your unconscious knows exactly what it's doing, repeating a pattern it recognizes. Another telling sign is what therapists call overreaction, emotional responses that seem disproportionate to the current situation. Perhaps a minor criticism from your boss sends you into a spiral of shame that lasts for days. Or a small disagreement with your partner triggers overwhelming fear of abandonment. These intensified emotional responses are often what psychologists call emotional flashbacks. Your system is not just reacting to the present moment, but to all the accumulated pain from similar past experiences. Pay attention also to your inexplicable attractions and aversions. Do you consistently feel drawn to people who ultimately hurt you in predictable ways? Do certain personalities or situations trigger an immediate sense of comfort or discomfort that you can't rationally explain? Jung referred to this as projection. We unconsciously project qualities of our early caretakers onto current figures in our lives, recreating familiar dynamics. One of the most insidious manifestations of unhealed trauma is what I call the comfort in discomfort. Paradoxically, situations that should make us feel secure and valued might instead feel boring, anxiety-provoking, or somehow off. Meanwhile, chaotic or even abusive dynamics might feel strangely comfortable or like home. This is your nervous system seeking the familiar even when the familiar is harmful. Psychologically, this makes perfect sense. The developing brain prioritizes survival above all else. As children, we needed to adapt to whatever environment we found ourselves in, however dysfunctional. If unpredictability was the norm, your nervous system adapted to navigate that chaos. If emotional neglect was your daily reality, you developed exquisite sensitivity to the slightest shifts in others' moods and needs, often at the expense of your own. These adaptations kept you safe as a child. The problem is that your adult life continues to be governed by these outdated survival strategies long after they've stopped serving you. As Jung noted, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Part of this acceptance is recognizing how these early adaptations have shaped your adult personality and choices. Let's get more specific about common trauma patterns. If you experienced emotional neglect or abandonment in childhood, you might now find yourself becoming the pursuer in relationships, anxiously seeking reassurance and connection, often pushing others away with the intensity of your needs. Or perhaps you became the distancer, maintaining emotional walls, avoiding vulnerability, always keeping one foot out the door to protect against the anticipated pain of abandonment. If you grew up with a parent who was inconsistent, loving one moment, rejecting the next, you might now be drawn to charismatic but unreliable partners, or struggle with an anxious attachment style that keeps you in a constant state of hypervigilance, always scanning for signs of rejection. If childhood taught you that your needs were burdensome or that expressing emotions was dangerous, you might now be the perpetual caretaker who struggles to receive, the mediator who avoids conflict at all costs, or the achievement-oriented person who believes love must be earned through performance. And if you experienced more severe trauma, physical or sexual abuse, witnessing violence, living with addiction, your patterns might include dissociation, mentally checking out during stress, self-medicating behaviors, difficulty trusting others, or a deep-seated belief that the world is fundamentally unsafe. These patterns don't indicate weakness or failure. They represent your psyche's brilliant adaptations to difficult circumstances. As Jung emphasized, the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. Your unconscious is simply trying to resolve unfinished business from your past. The question is, how do you begin to recognize your specific patterns? Start by looking for recurrences in your life, the types of people you're drawn to, the conflicts that repeatedly arise, the emotional states that feel most familiar. Journal about your childhood and notice parallels between early experiences and current challenges. Pay particular attention to what Jung called emotional complexes, topics or situations that trigger an emotional response that feels outsized or automatic. Ask trusted friends what patterns they observe in your life. Others often see our blind spots more clearly than we can. And notice your dreams, which Jung considered the royal road to the unconscious. Recurring dream themes often point directly to unresolved traumas and patterns. Recognition is powerful, but it's only the beginning. As we move into the next part of our exploration, we'll dive deeper into why these patterns persist, even after we've identified them, and the neurobiological reasons why intellectual understanding alone isn't enough to break free from trauma's grip. Remember, as Jung said, in all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order. Your patterns may seem random or self-defeating, but they contain profound intelligence and clues to your healing path. Stay with me as we continue to unravel this mystery in the next segment. Understanding why trauma patterns persist even after we recognize them requires us to delve into the fascinating intersection of neurobiology and psychology. As Jung observed, we cannot change anything until we accept it. But acceptance alone doesn't automatically create change, and there are profound reasons for this that science is only now beginning to fully comprehend. The brain and body store traumatic memories differently than ordinary experiences. When trauma occurs, especially during childhood, the experience often bypasses the brain's normal memory processing systems. rather than being stored as a coherent narrative in our explicit memory, the kind we can consciously recall and tell stories about. Trauma gets encoded in our implicit memory system, the unconscious bodily memory that governs our automatic responses. This is why trauma doesn't simply respond to logical reasoning or conscious intention. You can intellectually understand that your fear of abandonment comes from childhood experiences, yet still feel overwhelming panic when your partner is late coming home. Your rational mind knows one thing, but your body and unconscious mind are operating from a different reality entirely. Jung recognized this split between conscious understanding and unconscious programming. He wrote, "There are indeed things which conscious technique cannot reach. They can only be grasped through a profound experience which transforms the personality." This aligns with modern trauma research, which shows that healing requires not just insight, but experiences that directly address the body's stored trauma responses. Another reason these patterns persist is what neuroscientists call neural pruning. Throughout childhood, our brains develop by strengthening frequently used neural pathways while pruning away connections that aren't often activated. If your early environment required hypervigilance, people-pleasing, or emotional suppression, these response patterns became literally hardwired into your developing brain. The good news is that neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections, continues throughout life. But changing these deeply ingrained patterns requires consistent practice and embodied experiences, not just intellectual understanding. As Jung noted, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no universal recipe for living. Your healing journey must be tailored to your specific patterns and needs." Let's explore some of the most stubborn trauma patterns and why they persist. The pattern of attracting the familiar rather than the healthy stems from what attachment theorists call internal working models. These unconscious templates, formed in early relationships, govern our expectations and behaviors in adult connections. If you internalized a model that love equals inconsistency, or that you must earn affection through achievement, your nervous system will actually feel more comfortable in relationships that confirm these models, even when they cause suffering. Self-sabotage patterns persist because they originate as protective mechanisms. Consider the person who sabotages success just as they're about to achieve it. Perhaps in childhood, standing out meant facing jealousy, criticism, or having impossible standards imposed. The unconscious sabotage is actually an attempt to protect from these anticipated painful consequences. As Jung observed, the most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm that is not easily disturbed. The inner critic that many trauma survivors battle is often an internalized voice of critical caregivers or an adaptive attempt to perfect oneself to avoid criticism from others. This critic persists because at some level your psyche believes it's keeping you safe. If I criticize myself first and harshly enough, I'll avoid the pain of others' judgment. Numbing behaviors, whether through substances, workaholism, or constant distraction, persist because they successfully, if temporarily, alleviate the uncomfortable sensations of trauma stored in the body. Until those bodily sensations are addressed directly, the urge to escape them remains powerful. The rescuer or fixer pattern, common in those who grew up with unreliable caregivers, persists because it gives a sense of control and purpose in an otherwise unpredictable emotional landscape. If you couldn't count on receiving care, becoming the caregiver ensures connection while avoiding vulnerability. Jung emphasized that these patterns don't simply evaporate through willpower or intellect. He wrote, "The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate." Breaking free requires bringing these unconscious patterns fully into awareness and then creating new experiences that contradict the old neural pathways. This is precisely why talk therapy alone often isn't sufficient for resolving trauma. As Jung recognized long before modern neuroscience confirmed it, healing requires engaging the whole person: mind, body, emotions, and spirit. The patterns persist because they live not just in our thoughts, but in our nervous systems, our muscular tension, our breathing patterns, and our unconscious expectations. Consider how a trauma response feels in your body, perhaps tightness in your chest, shallow breathing, a churning stomach. These physical sensations trigger a cascade of thoughts and behaviors designed to alleviate the discomfort. Until those bodily sensations themselves are addressed, the pattern continues its self-perpetuating cycle. Jung intuited this mind-body connection when he developed active imagination techniques and emphasized the importance of symbolic experience. He understood that transformation requires more than cognitive insight. It requires new, corrective experiences that speak directly to the unconscious mind and body. As we move into the final part of our exploration, we'll examine specific approaches to breaking free from these persistent patterns, approaches that honor Jung's wisdom while incorporating modern understanding of trauma and neurobiology. We'll discover that liberation comes not through fighting these patterns, but through meeting them with consciousness and compassion, creating new neural pathways that offer genuine choice where once there was only automatic reaction. Now that we understand why trauma patterns persist, let's explore the path to freedom, how to break these cycles and truly transform your destiny. As Jung wisely stated, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." This final section offers practical wisdom for that transformation. The journey begins with what Jung called shadow work, the courageous act of facing the disowned parts of ourselves. Your trauma responses aren't enemies to be battled, but messengers carrying important information about your deepest wounds and needs. Meeting these patterns with curiosity rather than judgment creates the psychological space necessary for change. Start by practicing mindful awareness of your patterns in action. When you notice familiar emotional triggers or behavioral responses, pause. Breathe deeply. Ask yourself, what's happening in my body right now? What emotions am I experiencing? What early memory or pattern might this be connected to? This simple practice of conscious noticing interrupts automatic responses and creates a crucial gap between stimulus and reaction. Jung emphasized that healing requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands integration of the fragmented parts of our psyche. Modern trauma therapies echo this wisdom by focusing on approaches that address both mind and body. Somatic, body-centered therapies recognize that trauma is stored physically and must be released at that level. Practices like somatic experiencing, sensory-motor psychotherapy, and trauma-sensitive yoga help you track bodily sensations associated with trauma and gradually build new patterns of nervous system regulation. As you learn to feel safe in your body, the compulsion to repeat trauma patterns naturally diminishes. EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and other bilateral stimulation techniques help the brain reprocess traumatic memories, moving them from implicit bodily memory to explicit narrative memory, where they lose their automatic triggering power. Inner child work directly addresses the younger parts of yourself that carry trauma. By developing a compassionate internal relationship with these wounded aspects, you can offer them the safety, validation, and nurturing they needed but didn't receive. Jung recognized the importance of this internal healing dialogue when he wrote about the integration of different aspects of the psyche. Internal family systems therapy offers a framework for understanding how trauma creates fragmented parts of ourselves, protectors, managers, and exiles, and how to help these parts work together rather than at cross purposes. This aligns beautifully with Jung's concept of integrating the various complexes within the psyche. Parts of yourself that emerge to protect you from trauma deserve recognition for their service before they can relax their vigil. The hyper-independent part that never asks for help, the pleaser who sacrifices authentic needs, these aspects, developed for important reasons. Thank them, honor their purpose, then gently invite them to consider new ways of protecting you that don't limit your life. Creating corrective experiences is crucial for rewiring trauma patterns. If abandonment is your wound, gradually practice allowing safe people close while setting healthy boundaries. If perfectionism is your pattern, experiment with good enough efforts and notice that catastrophic consequences don't follow. Each new experience that contradicts your trauma expectation helps create new neural pathways. Community plays an essential role in healing. Jung recognized that isolation compounds trauma, while connection heals it. Find or create spaces where you can be authentically seen and accepted. Group therapy, support circles, and spiritual communities can all offer the relational healing that individual work alone cannot provide. Importantly, this journey isn't about reaching a trauma-free state. It's about developing a new relationship with your wounds. As Jung wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Your traumas, once consciously integrated, can become sources of profound wisdom, compassion, and even purpose. Many who heal their deepest wounds discover that their suffering gives birth to their greatest gifts to the world. The person who heals abandonment trauma often develops extraordinary capacity for presence with others. Those who overcome childhood, emotional neglect frequently become deeply attuned therapists, teachers, or artists. What was once your deepest pain can transform into your unique contribution. This alchemical transformation of suffering into meaning aligns with Jung's concept of individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self by integrating all aspects of your psyche, including the wounded ones. By consciously working with your trauma rather than being unconsciously driven by it, you participate in your own evolution. The path isn't linear, and healing doesn't mean never experiencing pain or triggers again. Rather, healing means developing the capacity to be with difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them. It means recognizing old patterns when they arise and having new choices available. It means responding rather than reacting. As you continue this journey, be gentle with yourself. Progress often happens in subtle shifts rather than dramatic breakthroughs. Celebrate small moments of choosing differently. Practice self-compassion when old patterns temporarily reassert themselves. Remember Jung's wisdom that the acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life. Your trauma may have shaped your past, but it need not determine your future. By bringing unconscious patterns into the light of awareness, by working with both mind and body, and by creating new experiences that contradict old expectations, you can gradually free yourself from trauma's grip. Your destiny is not fixed by your wounds, but revealed through your healing. As Jung reminded us, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." With each conscious choice, with each moment of presence, with each act of self-compassion, you reclaim your authorship of your own life story. The trauma that once seemed like destiny becomes instead the starting point of your journey toward wholeness, a journey that transforms not just your life, but ripples outward to heal the world around you. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of trauma, repetition, and transformation. I invite you to reflect on what patterns you're ready to bring into consciousness and what first steps you might take toward writing a new story for your life.